Welcome to the Boulder Criminal Lawyer Podcast. I'm your host, Elena Nicole, and today I'm here with Ian McDavid. Ian is a Boulder-based criminal defense attorney who has represented thousands of clients and taken over 40 cases to jury trial. And in this episode, we'll be breaking down the real-world legal side of DUI, from what actually happens during a traffic stop to how these cases are built, challenged, and decided on in court. So Ian, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Let's dive right in.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Elena.
So let's talk breathalyzers, the science of them, and then also their limits. So how do breathalyzer devices actually measure blood alcohol content, and what are the most common ways that the results can be wrong?
Well, Elena, I hate to not answer your question, but we don't entirely know how the breathalyzer machines work. The state of Colorado has, through various contracts with the manufacturer of this device, made it extremely difficult for people, lawyers, investigators, people who want to work for the defense side of this stuff to actually figure out how breath testing functions. There is a lot more science behind blood testing. They use, machines that are scientifically validated and procedures that are known to work and to be double checked and retested for blood testing. But for breath testing, it is a much different game. What happens is a person gets arrested. They're given that choice. If they choose a breath test, they're going to go to the police station. During that interaction, they've got basically two breaths that they're going to give 20 minutes apart, followed by a deprivation period to make sure that they're not burping or spitting any alcohol that's in their stomach up, which could hinder the results. But all that is to say is there are a bunch of different errors that can come out from those machines that you really don't have any way to track down. So for example, if the first breath sample that you give is more than 0.02, and if you want to think about what a 0.02 difference is, the legal limit's 0.08. So the two samples can differ by as much as 25% relative to that 0.08 limit, and the machine is still going to pass those. Now, if they're more than 0.02, more than 25% apart relative to that 0.08 limit, then it will finally throw out an error. Now, I don't think a 25% error rate is all that wonderful personally, but there are other problems that they can have with it, issues with the machine certification, issues with whether or not there's a sufficient like pressure that the person's putting in or pulling through the machine, so to speak. And there's lots of problems that they can throw.
What, if any, medical conditions can impact a breathalyzer reading or something someone may have consumed that's not alcohol? So maybe that's, a mint or gum or random other things that we've all heard could impact it.
Yeah.
Do either of those things impact, and how?
Yeah, so in theory, there are a number of different things that a person can consume that can be a problem on those tests. Most of the things that you can consume that's going to come up as hot on a breath test are probably really, really bad for you. And if you're testing for methyl alcohol or anything like that, you need to be at a hospital anyway. But in terms of medical conditions, that's where there's a lot more sort of issues. So people with GERD, that can sometimes be an issue where that their body is producing some of those higher level alcohols, cognigers and things like that. That's what shows up on the test when it's testing it, but it's not necessarily something that's actually impairing. Likewise, people with diabetes, they can have breath that smells a little bit boozy, and that can be a pretty well-known issue with law enforcement where they got somebody whose blood sugars are not right. That causes you to act strange, and all of a sudden you've got a strange person acting strange. If there's any alcohol on board or any reason to think that there's any other impairment, all of a sudden that person has a whole bunch of clues that they're impaired when in fact they're just actually having a medical episode.
Yeah. How often do you see something like that happening?
It's pretty rare. Yeah, I've certainly seen it happen, but it is pretty rare. For the most part, that comes up as a bit of an excuse. But then again, if you've got a medical condition, tell your lawyer about it, because that's the kind of thing that if you don't know about it, or if you don't ask, or if you don't communicate that with somebody, they would never know to look. So
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. So when would be a smart decision for someone to pass on taking the breathalyzer? And if they do that, what happens?
That's a tough question. So the smart decision on when to refuse the breathalyzer. I think a person ought to refuse that breathalyzer if they are real sure that they're not going to like what it puts out, right? And again, the advice here is don't put yourself in that situation. But if you are in that situation, you get to choose. You'll lose your license in that moment right away, effectively, or and then you get it back through a DMV hearing, but that's a process, and you'll lose it in the end anyway. You choose between either that or you take the test and then knowing exactly what's in your blood or your breath. And the law is set up exactly that way to essentially compel drivers to test or lose their license.
So if someone does refuse, what happens at that point?
So they're given a piece of paper that's called their express consent revocation form. That gives them 7 days of a temporary driving privilege, basically, so that they can get around and figure out what they're going to do now. The most important thing to do in that spot when you have that piece of paper, well, after you call a lawyer, is to call the DMV and get yourself set up for a hearing. We help people do those all the time, but it's certainly something you can also do on your own. But you want to get that hearing requested, because that's going to be your first opportunity to maybe get the cop on the stand to ask him questions, or that might be your first opportunity to really push back at whatever narrative the government's trying to push. And sometimes they don't show up to those hearings, and then you win by default, which is pretty cool too.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. So on the topic of breathalyzers, before we move on to a couple other areas, is there anything else that you think would be helpful for the audience to know? Maybe misconceptions or mistakes or anything else that you've seen with your experience that kind of comes to mind that would be helpful to share?
Yeah, and I mean, I don't like giving people advice on how to get away with DUIs, but I do like to think about how to minimize your risk, right? Because something that a lot of people don't know is that you can actually get a DUI from like prescription medications. You can get a DUI. I've represented people with like Ambien DUIs before, and those are really sad because it's not like they did anything intentionally wrong. The DUIs are a strict liability offense, and it doesn't matter what your intention is. If you're driving on Ambien, you're in trouble. And when it comes to breathalyzers, another misconception that I see a lot of is people will actually not take the breathalyzer, right? So even though what I just said about how there's problems with them, that there's junk science, there's issues, right? If you've had a beer, but you've been smoking pot, or you're a regular cannabis user, and you know that your bloodstream just always has some THC in it, don't go take the blood test, man, because that's going to show exactly what's in your blood. And they need to be assessing whether or not they're asking you for a breath test or a blood test based upon what they think your degree of impairment is. They're allowed to only get a blood test if they think you're high on drugs. So if they don't think you're high on drugs, don't choose a blood test, right? Choose the breath test every single time, because that's only going to show alcohol. That's not going to show THC. That's not going to show your medications. I mean, people that are on ADHD medications, there's a concern that they might get a DUI from that, because that's a meth-derived product. And it sounds kind of crazy to think about, but yet it does happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously, people are on give the example of the ADHD medication or other prescribed drugs. Now, does it determine whether you could be eligible for a DUI charge? Is that the way you're behaving, you're driving, you're acting, if you're showing impairment? Is that person, it's their job to know, can I operate a vehicle or not? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Elena.
Okay.
It doesn't matter whether it's a fun drug, a recreational drug, or a prescription drug. Benadryl. I think a person could get a really horrible DUI from Benadryl, because that really, at least it really impacts me, and that's a real dangerous place to be in when you're driving on those types of things. But any kind of drug, prescription, non-prescription. Honestly, caffeine. I've never seen a caffeine DUI, of course, but I think theoretically a person could, right?
Yeah.
It's any substance that could be the issue.
And how about, I know I've heard people being worried about getting DUIs on things like lawnmowers or, the motorized, they have all those motorized bikes and things now. How does that work?
With care and caution. Any motorized vehicle, even a bicycle, people can get DUIs on a bike, man-powered bike. And caution is always the word here. Don't go operating motor vehicles of any kind, boats, cars. Not sure that trains count as motor vehicles, believe it or not, but don't drive those under the influence either. Yeah, the lift scooters, those are all prime places for a person to get in trouble for this. I've seen a handful of bicycle DUIs, and I think I've seen a handful of like ATV or boat DUIs, maybe some like of those little tiny like kid scooter things that people put big engines on. It's very rare though, and that's because most people are biking pretty safe, even if they're slightly under the influence. And if you're substantially impaired, you're probably not biking at all.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, this has been a great conversation. Is there anything else that you think would be really helpful for people to know that we didn't cover kind of in these little categories of topics when it comes to DUI?
No, I think I covered it.
We covered everything? Okay,
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Ian. Again, this was a great conversation. Thanks to everyone listening, and we'll see you next time.